Hello everyone and welcome to our show. My name is Ana Pacuraru and along with my dear friend Dr. Mihail Neamtu, we are journalists who have felt a strong inclination to give Western values our most earnest and hearty support, for we are sure that its successful broadcast would enhance the pecuniary minds of some of the most valued leaders of our country. Thus, we have founded Liberty Hub, Defending the West. Our show draws attention upon the conservative values which liberate, as opposed to the liberal values that subjugate. Our Christian conservative approach wishes to bring a new perspective from Eastern Europe into the American situation and a further international understanding from which free-thinking people evolve. If I could be actuated by any conceivable inducement to betray the sacred trust reposed in me by those to whose generous confidence I am indebted for the honor of a seat in the mass media floor, I must stress the importance of our honorable guests that will be joining us throughout the show's lifetime. It is imperious for us that the voices of the intellectual and powerful be heard in such times when we are facing uncertainty and mass manipulation. I would like to quote the former mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, in his response to months of campaigning by black activists against the statues in New Orleans of Confederate leaders in 2017. Anything less would render generations of courageous struggle and soul-searching a truly lost cause. Anything less would fall short of immortal words of our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln, who with an open heart and clarity of purpose calls on us today across the ages to unite as one people when he said, "With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." With these being said, I would like to give the floor to my dear friend, Dr. Mihail Neamtu, a rooted citizen in the Eastern European ethos and a true Trump supporter. Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I see that you are very much fired up by this introduction. Very moving. Thank you very much for this superb framing of our conversation. I really do believe that Eastern European intellectuals, maybe diplomats and politicians, have something to say about the struggle for our Western civilization. Because in the light of the recent events, such as like the destruction of the statues, destruction of Winston Churchill's statue in London, I'm afraid, how would you put it, like desacralization of national symbols in America, we have to say something about what's going on. Why? Because we belong, I mean, maybe not so much you, but I do belong to a generation of Eastern Europeans who very much appreciated, loved America, and trusted that the West has something very good to offer to the entire world, to the entire planet. That's why we were hoping before 1989 to see the destruction of the Berlin Wall, because we did believe that the West is a superior civilization that has a lot to give us and a lot to perhaps give us, not just, I mean, us, the Eastern Europeans, but as I said, all those who experienced communism or any form of totalitarianism in general. So I'm very thankful for this. I'm hoping that we will have great minds participating in our conversation. So let's hope for the best.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited about this new opportunity for sure. I would like to delve in directly to the subject and tell me, what do you think are the Western pillars of the Judeo-Christian civilization?
Well, many philosophers and historians have tried to pin down, as it were, the identity of the West by looking at different institutions, for instance, like the family. Obviously, we in the West have been shaped by the Judeo tradition, by the Judaic tradition, I mean by the Hebrew tradition. We were taught by our ancestors to respect the family because it's the place where life takes place, right? So in order to preserve the sanctity of human life, you have to preserve the sanctity of the human family by and large, and of the Christian family in particular. So family is an important, sacrosanct even institution which the West has built upon. Having kids, taking the discipline of parenting, being obedient to your mom and to your father, listening to the stories of your grandparents was always very important. Passing on the values from one generation to another is a fundamental act of, I would say, human discipline. On the other hand, apart from the family, you've got, I would say, the church or the community of love, which is built around the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean, we may have different approaches to, how do you define this gospel, or how do you experience the gospel, or how do you explain it. But fundamentally, in the West, we recognize the church as that part of our experience in which both the rich and the poor can partake. And unfortunately, in the last, I'd say, 30 years, we've seen a constant attack upon this institution. Revelations about the corruption that's taking place inside were perhaps helpful in order to purge.
Who is attacking our society?
I mean, I think, honestly, there are enemies from within and enemies from the outside. You've got the secularists, and there are those who believe that God is not alive or doesn't exist, or God doesn't mean anything. And they truly believe we should replace the church with perhaps different NGOs or other such bodies that will consume our energy and our efforts into a new direction, and that will not be a direction that perhaps transcends our material world, but on the contrary, it will be a direction in which we only see the material world. So you've got the church, you've got the family, then you've got private property, and private property came under attack recently. You saw the mobs, the violent mobs, the looting taking place in very impressive cities such as Seattle, such as, I don't know, Los Angeles or New York. I mean, it was incredible to see Manhattan being completely destroyed by these vandals, I would call them. So private property, I would say the rule of law is another institution. What do we mean by the rule of law? We mean that politicians and the judges should never talk to each other in order to perhaps strike a deal. But unfortunately, we've seen corruption taking place even in America. We traditionally thought America is a beacon of democracy and rule of law. But unfortunately, we saw politicians in America. Perhaps I could mention Mrs. Hillary Clinton. She's one very fine example of, I would say, corrupt politicians who very much used the power of the state in order to enrich themselves. And there are many, many such examples. So I would say the West is under attack from within, okay, because you've got ideologues taking a dominant position in our society. Perhaps you can think of journalists who are not informing the younger generations, but rather they are championing a cause, for instance, the cause of social justice. Such individuals, they really hate the foundations of the West. But also you've got enemies from the outside, such as China. China doesn't love our prosperity. China doesn't love the fact that still, to this day, you've got lines and lines of, citizens, strange, citizens, that is, people who do not have an American citizenship, but who want to have one, or people who just want to travel to America. We are broadcasting this from Bucharest, and you can very easily see there are queues, lots of queues of people who want to get a US passport, but they never queue or they never want to go to China. So obviously China is envious for the success of the West and for the success of America in general. This is one external enemy. Apart from China, who is I would say, a competitor, but also a dictatorial force, you've got radical Islam. Radical Islam is, unfortunately, still alive because perhaps of the COVID-19, because of the medical problems we faced. We have not seen in the recent past, in the last 6 months, any terrorist attack. However, we know that perhaps starting with 2004, at least in Europe, with the attack in Madrid, then later on with the attacks taking place in London, in Paris, in, I would say, also Berlin, and Munich, many jihadists have shown the fact that they hate our world. And finally, I would say, apart from China, apart from radical Islam, you've got, I have to say, Russia. Russia doesn't really like the fact that the West is very powerful economically, at least, and they are trying to use the old tactics, that is, to divide the European Union and to divide America from Europe on the one hand, and at the same time to conquer, ideologically at least, parts of our population.
I would like to take a look at President Trump now, because he is the leader, let's say, of our show.
Well, he's the arch enemy of
sure.
of many liberals, of many progressives, of many secularists. He's also the arch enemy of the Communist Party in China. And I think it's very important to stress that 2020 is a critical year, not just because we have elections taking place in America, but because Trump, Mr. Trump, Donald Trump, by being re-elected, could still preserve the treasures of the West in a way in which I think no democratic candidate would be able to do so.
I believe the same thing, and I think it's very important that we will also be broadcasting up until the elections, so everyone who is watching us can stay tuned.
We certainly need your energy and your focus on the elections.
Well, I would like to take a look at the pivotal speech that defined, let's say, the beginning of President Trump's career, the Warsaw speech. How would you comment on that?
Well, I would say that as an Eastern European, I was very, very, very pleased. And before I make a substantial commentary on Trump's speech in Warsaw, I want to say that just the mere fact that he visited Eastern Europe was very powerful. I mean, for me, to see an American president, any American president, visiting Eastern Europe is an important, I would say, message that tells us that America has never forgotten the sacrifices made by millions of Eastern Europeans during or under communism.
And if I may add,
Yeah.
you saw how he was treated when he got there. Everyone supported him. The whole Poland was in agreement with him, and it was an emotional scenery even for him that many politicians even refer to as today.
Can we also mention the fact that Melania Trump is also from Eastern Europe?
Of
and that the
course.
first wife of Mr. Trump was also from Eastern Europe?
Yes.
So it seems there is
Ivanka.
a kind of, I would say, natural connection. Mr. Trump heard stories about communism from his relatives, right? He has a German background, you know, when it comes to it. I think when he was very young, he understood from his father the tragedy of both Nazi Germany and communist Germany. He was born, I think, in 1942, Mr. Trump. And so he saw the destruction of Eastern Germany by the communists in the 40s, late 40s and mid-50s. He's got the second connection to Eastern Europe through his first wife and then through Melania Trump. And I have to say one thing, perhaps you didn't know about this, but Ivanka Trump and Eric Trump and Donald Trump, Jr., they visited Czechoslovakia in the 80s, and they were very young. They were like 9 or 10 years old. And when they went back to New York, they realized how lucky they were not to be asked to live in a country like Czechoslovakia or like Romania or like Poland. Now, you know, 40 years down the road, what is the political significance of the Warsaw speech? I would say that there are three firm pillars standing today between the United States and Eastern Europe. You've got Poland, right? The Baltic states, and our country. We are broadcasting from Bucharest, and that's Romania. These three important allies of the United States, they create a north-south cordon sanitaire against the Russian encroachment, but perhaps also against the Chinese encroachment, which we are recently witnessing. At the same time, our countries, our societies, including Poland, seem to be immune to this anti-American posture of some West European elites. Think of Emmanuel Macron. For the past 20 years, together with many other leading pro-American politicians, businessmen, and journalists in this part of the world, I myself have been on the front lines of public debate in the constant ideological, political, and philosophical war to encourage my country and my friends from America to fully embrace the Western values. This is particularly important today in terms of assuring that Eastern European nations such as Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, Poland again, and the Baltic states, they uphold democratic standards and they also respect the rule of law. There are areas in which we must draw inspiration from the United States. After all, the United States was built on this amazing document called the Constitution. What we are seeing today in Europe, in general, is this pervasive cronyism, slowly corroding our fragile foundations. This corruption, which is not just national but also international, is taking place despite the fact that our countries enjoy a positive relation with international partners. We've got to do more. And despite the strong natural attraction of the people in these countries to Western and particularly American values, we are seeing, as I said, China becoming more and more interested in our part of the world. I yesterday visited Constanza and at the Black Sea shores, and obviously there's a very great interest from China in seizing perhaps this port from the Black Sea as a strategic move, which we have also seen or watched in Greece. Now, Mr. Trump, when he gave that speech in Warsaw, was very much aware that Romania is a country which plays a critical role in defending the eastern frontiers of NATO. Romania and Poland are two pivotal regional powers that cherish publicly the Judeo-Christian values. Think of John Paul II, for instance, or think of the many, many Christian preachers and priests who survived the communist gulag in this part of the world. The peoples of our Eastern European nations are very fond of individual liberty. They have personally survived the traumas of the communist totalitarianism, while their ancestors, and I think here of my grandfather, for instance, had a first-hand experience of either the Ottoman rule or the Russian autocracy. These encouraging signs give us hope that the rampant corruption of the political class in our countries may one day come to an end. It's perhaps my generation's task to end this corruption and fully ally our efforts in a partnership, in a transatlantic partnership with the United States. Unlike in the early years of Eastern Europe's partnership with NATO, the challenge now is not to create democratic institutions, we've got them, but to prevent, as I said, the erosion, the slow erosion of democracy. It is an ideological war that is waged within the countries of NATO, and we have to be aware of it. Donald Trump's speech in Warsaw emphasized the fact that our Christian tradition always valued the dignity of the individual, the sanctity of the human life, the also critique of any form of tyrannical rule. Also, our Christian tradition emphasized the importance of private initiative, entrepreneurship, the construction of a vibrant civil society predicated upon a local participatory framework. Our Christian faith is visible in all forms of life. However, people in Russia decided to manipulate our faith in God and to put religion into the service of an anti-Western propaganda. So, in Poland, Romania, Georgia, Slovakia, as I said, and the Baltic states, there's a large variety of pro-American politicians, businessmen, university professors and journalists who are eager to disseminate the positive aspects of the American dream. I would say this is just the opposite of what we are seeing in many American colleges, where lots of professors destroy the American dream and hate, I would say, the foundations of the American Republic. Keeping Eastern Europe politically stable and culturally healthy is essential. to ensure a strong and enduring transatlantic alliance, especially in the light of the Chinese encroachment after the medical crisis with COVID-19. Obviously, Mr. Trump spoke in a different language from the, I would say, newspeak used by Barack Obama for almost a decade. Under the Democratic administration of Barack Obama, we have seen many programs supported or financed by the Department of State, which funded the, I would say, neo-Marxist rhetoric of many NGOs here in the region. With Donald Trump in power, we see now new American leaders such as Mike Pence or Mike Pompeo showing respect for the Christian values of our Eastern European nations. And this seems to be having a game-changing impact on the entire region, happily so. This respect for our Christian tradition could improve the pace and alter the nature of reforms from liberalization in the realm of education to healthcare and economics more broadly. If we are reading the recent polls documenting the pro-American sentiments in Europe, in Romania in particular, we know that millions of Eastern Europeans would welcome a soft power surge supporting Western values in their part of the world for the first time since the fall of communism. Eastern Europe stands at a crossroads today. However, we need to make sure that the cultural values of the younger generation are kept healthy. Perhaps the second term of Mr. Trump's presidency will focus more on Eastern Europe, because this, I think, is a critical move. The support for our nations, the support for our part of the world, which is, I would say, culturally compatible with the West. American strategic support on this non-military front of promoting Western Christian values has become a critical necessity.
Pierre-Antoine Plaquevent, one of the pinnacles of the new European dissident, investigated and wrote about the metapolitical globalization behind George Soros' apocalyptical traits through a Christian lens. He noted that to better understand the axiology that supports the trans-historical confrontation between open society and organic or closed societies for Soros, it is imperious to make a foray into Karl Popper's thinking. Unlike his disciple, Karl Popper does not consider closed society as a stage in the process of decomposing a traditional and organic society. He does not consider it a totalitarian attempt to maintain its homogeneity in the face of the changes that occur. For him, the term closed society defines the state of any organic and traditional society. Apart from this nuance, we can observe that George Soros only took over and developed Karl Popper's ideas. It can drape itself in humanistic clothes in order to achieve its goals. And I quote, "The concept of humanity is a particularly useful ideological tool for imperialist expansions, and in this humanitarian ethical form, it is a specific vehicle of economic imperialism," a definition that seems to have been written specifically for George Soros. A beneficial humanist and democratic imperialism because it tends to decompose organic societies through their tribal and totalitarian essence. George Soros is described by the mainstream media as an investor and philanthropist with a net worth of $25 billion. He made his fortune in the US manipulating the market using crisis to further increase his own wealth and to expand his power. He takes no responsibility of the actions he has taken. And I quote, "I am here to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do." Well, here's a different aspect that we haven't really touched upon in the past, and I think in Romania, very few people have. What is your opinion on this quote that George Soros actually attains to?
I think George Soros is somebody who really doesn't look at the human cost of many of his financial decisions. If you consider what he did in England, for instance, with the currency there, with the sterling. If you also consider what he did, I think, in parts of Asia, such as Malaysia, I think, Thailand, he's very much hated there. He basically manipulated the currency so that he could profit from it. Later on, with the money he gained through such manipulation of currencies, he managed to buy, I mean literally buy, I would say, the minds and the hearts of some influential politicians. In the past, I've seen that the open society was used to boast about the fact that about 250 MPs, members of the European, MEPs, that is, members of the European Parliament, were very close to Soros's philosophy. But also in our part of the world, that is Eastern Europe, Soros has invested a lot of money in order to make friends. Obviously, I think it's very dubious when you basically impoverish millions of people in Asia, for instance, yeah? Just take the example of Thailand or Malaysia. And then with the money you have gained from impoverishing some, as I said, millions of people there, you come in a, I would say, sort of decent area of the world, that is Eastern Europe, and with not so much money, with maybe less than, I would say, $200 million, you make sure you create a network of supporters. Now, this is what his strategy looks like. What is his philosophy? I was very impressed, by the way, with the very deep analysis that you've provided us with of the relationship between Karl Popper and Soros. Who was Karl Popper? Karl Popper was somebody who studied science in the 1930s in Vienna and London. He was maybe the mentor of George Soros. However, I never thought that somebody like Karl Popper would agree with the new kind of collectivism that George Soros is promoting in America. George Soros is somebody who hates the fact that Christianity is still relevant in contemporary America. Why? Because around the church, you've always had, and this is the lesson we gain from reading Alexis de Tocqueville, around the church, you always had a kind of vibrant civil society made up by groups, family associations, and NGOs which support the poor, maybe different book clubs, students, educational forums, and so on and so forth. The fact that the church had such a long-lasting influence upon the Christian church, upon the traditional American society is something that very much bothers Soros. So he wants to change all that by implementing a new type of education, an education in which you as a student have to critique your father and mother, to deny any sense of allegiance to your ancestors, and maybe this is his position. Maybe George Soros is a person without a country. Maybe he doesn't feel at home in Hungary, though he was born there. He was born in Budapest, to the best of my knowledge. He doesn't feel at home in America because he basically hates America. He bashes
by his own blueprints.
Exactly. He bashes America every time he has an opportunity to do so. And maybe that's his choice, But perhaps you and me consider, and many of Trump supporters consider the same, that having a natural attachment to your homeland, loving the poems you've first read when you were young in your mother tongue, in your native language, having a special attachment to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, perhaps we'll speak about this later on, is something valuable and worthy of appreciation. Now, Soros doesn't believe that. He wants you to be somebody without roots, a citizen with no memory, maybe just an individual who can switch places or who can move anywhere without any sense of belonging. And that's, I would say, the end of any type of political existence.
I would really want to get back to the subject in our further shows because it is a very sensitive subject, I think, to many.
But Antifa, being perhaps at some point supported by Soros as well, Antifa is precisely the kind of organization that wants you to have no sense of appreciation, respect, honor for those who have built a country. That country can be Romania, that country can be Poland, that country can be Great Britain, or
and we have actually seen recently what they're able to do. The looting, the destroying, that is not a pillar we should build our society upon.
Maybe we can discuss about this because Trump gave a speech on it.
We should, but unfortunately we're out of time. This concludes our first show, and
This was very quick.
Exactly, I think it turned out to be a really great show.
Thank you so much, Anna. I want to say that I believe this is just one step towards a great project, which is to unite conservatives of all walks of life around some common values. I like this, this place, this setting, especially because it conveys that sense of unity which we have to gain again.
Well, I think that for last words, to say the words of wisdom, God bless America, God bless Romania, and God bless the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.